OnAir, the official podcast of the Association for Intelligent Information Management. Founded in 1944, AIIM is dedicated to advancing the information management industry. We represent a vibrant global community of information leaders committed to driving exceptional business outcomes through information management fueled by technology like AI and automation. You can learn more at AIIM.org. I am AIM President and CEO, Tori Miller Liu, and today we are speaking with the TWAIN Working Group, a not-for-profit organization which represents the imaging industry and offers TWAIN Direct, a universal platform for scanning documents from any brand scanning device without proprietary device drivers. And I am joined by TWAIN's chair, Joseph Odore, the Global Portfolio Marketing Manager with Kodak Alaris. Joseph, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Tori. Pleasure to be here.
Well, okay, Joseph, let's dive right in. I talked a little bit about what TWAIN Working Group is, but can you walk us through the history? Because your group's been around for quite some time, and I'm curious about what led to the formation of the group and how you've evolved since your inception.
So we were formed in 1992. I would say I wasn't there at the beginning. I was much younger, probably too young to be in the industry at the time.
Like a 2-year-old or something, right?
Let's just say I was in high school.
Okay.
So I'm not that young. But too young to have been in the industry at the time. So when TWAIN was formed, it really transpired out of all of the technologies or imaging technologies that were being developed, in the early 90s. When digital cameras first hit the scene, USB-based devices hit the scene, serial-based devices were out there, printers, digital cameras, scanners, everything of that nature. When these products were first introduced by multiple manufacturers, they all had their own driver technology for transferring, image data from the hardware to the PC via the software. And there were certain vendors or technologies that did it better than others, but there was a lot of inconsistency on how the user experience was, how documents were transferred, how images were transferred, and so forth. So at one point, a group of people just got together and said, "Hey, we need to do something to make this a more standard experience." And everybody can utilize this technology for transferring images. So that's how TWAIN was born. At the same time, I believe there was other technologies like ISIS as well, which is still around today, which had their own means of transferring image data, but there was also a royalty fee to accomplish that, which it still exists today. So this group of people came together and in a very short period of time ended up putting a list of specifications and code together to allow any manufacturer to basically build their driver infrastructure to acquire images from these devices into applications in a very uniform way. Now, since then, it's definitely evolved more from multiple imaging acquisition devices, like cameras and stuff, to where it's now more dedicated to the document management side of the technology. So, for I would say the grander part of all the releases and updates and the specification, it was all based on how to transfer paper documents digitally to a PC into an application. And the nice thing about that is it allowed a universal interface for software developers to have a common user experience or a common coding language, right, for their applications, allowing their application to talk to the drivers that came with the hardware.
And kind of extending maybe the use applications a little bit further, help me explain it to a layperson about the significance of that standardization. And the use case that I'm going to give you is I'm the CIO, pretend I'm the CIO of, say, maybe a large supply chain company. And we have a process where every mailed in invoice we get for accounts payable is scanned into our accounting software. And we get a lot of invoices because we're a huge, massive company. So let's say we get like, 1,000 invoices a month. And we need this imaging software and scanning technology to help us digest that. For that CIO, what's the significance of that standardization? Why is it so important?
So from a direct end user standpoint, it's not as you're not affected by that standpoint so much. Uh,
Hmm.
where it does have an effect is if you like a particular software offering, okay, right? You got to make sure that that offering will work with not just one type of device or or one branded device, right? You want some flexibility in your purchasing option, right? So what you don't want happening is your software vendor saying, yeah, have my software, but you are now forced to buy a piece of hardware that we tell you you have to because
Hmm.
the only one that worked. So think about if software vendors and hardware vendors all had their own individual specification for acquiring images. Every software vendor would actually have to build an integration, right, or a communication path from the software to the hardware. And they'd have to do it for multiple manufacturers because you don't want to limit yourself to just one vendor, right? Same
Hmm.
thing for hardware manufacturers, right? If they want to participate in certain customer business, then they're going to do things to help communicate with certain pieces of software, right? So the Twain specification was developed not just for the hardware side of the house, but the software side of the house, right? It's
Yeah.
the common language or the bridge that connects hardware drivers and software applications to communicate, and it allows that for all manufacturers to participate, right? So not only does Kodak Alaris have a Twain driver, Fujitsu or Ricoh PFU has a Twain driver, Canon has a Twain driver, Xerox has a Twain driver, right? It's that universal language that allows hardware to speak to software, and that's why the organization was formed to allow that to happen. And the beauty of it is we've had members from both software and hardware manufacturers involved in that process, right? Because we want to know how their software is communicating and how the hardware communicates. The other nice thing is if you're a software developer, do you really want to figure out how to communicate with hardware? Or do you just want a simple set of code and instruction that says, I'm just going to use this Twain specification, I'm going to build my code to it, and boom, I'm going to work with the mass market.
That's such a good way to explain it, and I think it's worth noting to the listeners, um, TWAIN Working Group is a fabulous group, but almost more importantly, at a macro level, standardization in an industry is really vital, because just as you said, that kind of standardization makes people's lives easier, software developers in this case, and it also gives flexibility to the consumer, empowering consumers. In this case, it's the folks making the decisions about what hardware and software am I using. So
That's
I think I'm doing a little soapbox around standardization, but it's such an important thing almost in any field, right? It gives
yeah.
power to the people in a way, right?
Yeah, and software and hardware organizations alike, right? If we didn't have a standard, we'd be spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make everything work with everybody else, and they'd have to do it on an individual level. So if
Yeah.
a scanner manufacturer releases a new piece of hardware, right, there's always going to be something unique to that a software developer is then going to have to do something in their software to make it work. Whereas Twain allows it for a universal connection.
So for software developers, is do you often advise them if they're getting into the imaging industry, become acquainted with the specifications of the Twain standard? Is
Yeah,
that
so the nice thing about us is, we're not for profit. So our specifications, every time we release one, we make them public. So if somebody's just looking to incorporate scanning technology or scanning the ability to scan from scanners into their software, all they need to do is take the specification and put the code into their application, right? It's really a no-brainer. And in this day and age, coding Twain drivers is not very heavy lift, right? The technology has been around for 20 almost 30 20 30 years almost, right?
Mhm.
So think about the amount of time that's went into those specifications, and uh, most software vendors who are in document management, they're already familiar with Twain and or ISIS.
Let's talk a little bit about the specifications, because I would consider the development of those specifications one of the most lasting achievements of your organization. So, how are the specifications developed? How are they updated? What does that look like? Who's involved in that?
So it's a combination of everybody within the TWAIN Working Group. So we do have a technical chair that kind of oversees the specification. Um, we obviously talk about any features or enhancements that we're going to do in TWAIN. Um, to be very honest with you, in the last 5 or 6, call it 7 years, there hasn't been a large amount of change or enhancements to the TWAIN specification. I hate to say it's a little bit more on the mature side, but it is functional, right? It works, it's got wide adoption, right? So for something that's royalty free, something that's easy to, incorporate into, software, right? It's just been long lasting. So really, it's just been about feature enhancements or, kind of minute functionalities, that expand beyond the basic operation of a scanner, right?
Although it's probably worth pointing out that I think it's reached that level of maturity and functionality because the working group has maintained it and paid attention to it, and you
That's
you
correct.
you look at those specifications every year and keep it updated.
Yeah.
So, uh, for someone who's interested in joining the working group, what would their experience look like as a member of the working group?
So a lot of the most current activity has been around TWAIN Direct,
Mhm.
which takes the traditional ad hoc USB based scanning hardware up to the network level. And when you
Hmm.
get to the network level, right, we're not talking about drivers anymore. So what we're trying to do with TWAIN Direct is instill the same universal standards for image acquisition from hardware to applications directly over the network without using drivers on a PC, right? I mean, technically, you can even use a USB based device with a little piece of hardware, which we'll call a bridge or a sidecar, that allows your scanner to communicate with the application directly. And we know applications, and with the world shifting to more mobile technologies, less laptops, less desktops, right? More iPads, tablet PCs and stuff
Yeah.
like that, right? The goal is to move away from more traditional software integration and get more into cloud-based or web-based applications. So the beauty of TWAIN Direct is that I can build my web-based application in the cloud, and with a little bit of code, I can allow it to communicate with the scanner over the network, over the internet. You could be anywhere in the country and communicate with the scanner, right? And it's a universal language. So if you think about today, even if you're looking at multifunction devices, right? Multifunction devices are great where you can have integrations from the hardware to a software application, but it requires the software vendor to understand what the hardware vendor's SDKs or APIs are for that communication, right? So we're falling in that kind of same situation we did back in 1992. Every scanner manufacturer has their own way of communicating and operating. Every software vendor has a preferred way they'd like to operate. But the problem is if you want two to match, there is some level of advanced integration or development that has to happen. TWAIN Direct simplifies that. It devises code for both the hardware and the software, where if you put the code in each place, you could support any of these devices.
Oh, that's fascinating. And
Yeah,
I imagine because you've designed Twain Direct for a cloud ecosystem, does that makes deployment quite a bit easier too, right? Because you're not manually installing it on every piece of hardware, right?
that's correct. So the basic experience is if you have your hardware natively supporting TWAIN Direct from a firmware level standpoint, it's as simple as just inputting a URL or an IP address, maybe a login and password to a system. That is your setup experience. And generally, these devices might have an embedded web page that you'll access that information on. Then what you'll have is your TWAIN Direct. Maybe the best way to call it is like a store. This TWAIN Direct store is your repository of your hardware that's TWAIN Direct enabled. That, that says I have a scanner that's enabled. I have a repository or a list of scanners that are network or TWAIN Direct enabled. Now I've got my software application that's going to talk to this kind of little um, list of scanners and say, okay, I want to scan and I want to be able to select this scanner at this location or whatnot. And then from there, I can just hit scan from my browser-based application. It's going to communicate directly from the software all the way down to the scanner and acquire those images.
Nice.
Yeah. And it's even great too, because right, it works great for mobile. For mobile technology, you don't need an application for that, right? You don't have to have an iOS app, you don't have a Google Play app, you don't have a Microsoft app. You have a web browser. Every phone, every tablet, every PC
Yeah.
has a web browser. So think about logging into your application via browser. I hit scan, and that scan command is going to go from wherever that server is all the way down to the scanner and acquire those images.
That's wonderful. That it's night and day from what it was to install software like 15 years ago,
It
right?
is, it doesn't seem in this day and age like it's a very high tech thing, and I get that, right? There's so many cool technologies and generative AI, right? But the reality is most companies, most CIOs, CTOs, whatever, they're still buying ad hoc USB based scanners because they've
Yeah.
got them, they've got a client that they're connected to, and that's how they're going to operate.
Yeah.
And we're trying with TWAIN Direct to kind of make that shift in the hardware, right? And you'll see a lot of manufacturers are releasing network enabled devices, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll have an Ethernet port on it. I mean, once you have that port on there, right, the possibilities are endless in what you do on the firmware and the software of the device. But that's what we're trying to lead to, right? We're trying to lead to get away from having that desktop PC or that desk you're committed to, right? And take that device and be able to scan directly into your application, right?
Yeah.
And it's less management for IT people, right? So IT resources spent on my application crashed, it's not communicating, it's not USB cable is not working, right? All these little nuances, are generally multiplied by a lot, in an IT infrastructure. So thinking about eliminating the need for maintaining a piece of software or making sure your IT staff is always updating the software or the driver for your device every time there's a release, right? It's a build one, support many. And that's the beauty of it. TWAIN Direct is brand agnostic, product agnostic. If TWAIN Direct has a feature and the hardware doesn't support it, it doesn't error out. It just continues to acquire an image with whatever settings or features are available. It'll always generate an image for you.
And it's sort of looking at the flip side of this, since a lot of our members, of course, are information management practitioners, they're very often leading or an integral part of system selections, information management system selections, whether it's document management, image scanning. When they're in the midst of that system selection, would it be fair to say that there are probably a couple questions that they should ask their vendors after kind of hearing this explanation of TWAIN Direct and TWAIN Working Group? I would say one is you want to find solutions that are built on brand agnostic standards, would be one. And then two, I like the phrase you said, is it network enabled? How am I going to deploy this? How is implementation eased by using mobile and cloud technologies? And then three, how is this maintained? As you said, ideally, when you have something like TWAIN Direct, when there are service packages, updates of any kind, you're able to easily deploy those. Do you think that's a pretty complete list? Anything you would add or change?
Yeah, I mean, it seems fairly complete. I think, one challenge which gets overlooked as an issue, I think, for most software vendors or IT people maintaining it, right? Whenever they're looking at hardware today, what they'll generally do is they just won't buy it off the shelf. They're going to work with a reseller or a manufacturer, and they're going to get a sample unit. They're going to plug it in, then they're going to make sure it works. The beauty of TWAIN Direct is it's always going to work. You never have to worry about, any kind of regression testing, right? And, as an IT person or, technology officer, your move is going to be towards more cloud and mobile based technologies in this day and
Hmm.
age, especially as security gets, stronger and stronger, right? But, think about when you're wanting to move away from client based software, right? And you want to drive everything from a centralized location. Everything's on a server or in a cloud in this day and age. Why worry about the resources and the requirements locally for a user when that can all be offloaded independently? A scanner, you'll utilizes zero PC resources, right? It's a simple, hey, I need a scan, and the scanner says, okay, here's your document. And it's as
Yeah.
simple as that.
So tell me a little bit more then about how TWAIN is adapting to ensure compatibility and relevance in this mobile and cloud environment. TWAIN Direct is certainly a big part of that. What else is TWAIN doing to mature image scanning so that it can function well in a mobile and cloud world?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just a matter of ongoing development, that that we work with certain parties. When you think about the code hasn't really changed so much since we introduced it back in 2019, right? We've made enhancements to it, but the nice thing is it's a core technology, right, that gets implemented, and from there, there's a lot of flexibility. Software vendors can take that code, put the functionality into their software, and they could build in security. They could build in other features and functionalities. Manufacturers have to follow that set code, right? It's the two pieces of the puzzle, the software and the hardware. The
Mhm.
core piece has to talk to each other based on the specification, but there are unique things you can do on each side, to set yourself apart, right? From there, you can have add-ons and stuff like that, but the core of it is all about being able to communicate.
Such a good way to explain it. I have a feeling that you regularly have to explain this to people who aren't
I I I might
enmeshed.
have I might have
Yeah.
done it a few times
A few times.
already.
It's pretty practiced. It's a good answer. Um, so tell me, you're an expert in document capture technology. What are
Mhm.
some of the emerging trends or technologies that are going to be shaping the future of the imaging industry?
So the immediate ones we've been working on recently, one is content authenticity. So, the deep fake. There's so
Yeah.
much that can be done in generative AI today. It's quite amazing. But the reality is anybody with AI could take something genuine and turn it into something disingenuous, right? We've seen it. If you're on Facebook, I'm sure you've seen so many things
Yeah.
done. You're right. Think about when something politically happens in the US today, and all of a sudden within minutes there are faces of political figures on top of weird scenarios, or they're superimposed into movies, right? And the reality is there is not a highly skilled person now creating that stuff. It is some kid on a cell phone taking some generative AI app and creating something funny out of it, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are nefarious people in the world that are always trying to do harm, whether it's financially, especially financially, right? So they're going to try and disguise things. They're going to use generative AI to make genuine things look disingenuous and try
Mhm.
and con people out of it, right? So content authenticity is one of the things that we're working on. So, as we get into our Developers Day event later this year, right, we're going to have C2PA, which is the content authority on it, right? And they've got ways where we can integrate that. Security will always continue to be something that continues to evolve in here. But I mean, generative AI, artificial intelligence, right? Those are the big things that are really driving forward. And the challenges there are going to be just uh, political and policy related challenges, right? As the governments globally are really looking at artificial intelligence, right? They're looking at ways to protect their own governments, protect their constituents, right? Those are all important things. The other thing to look at too is, while AI is great, I don't think a lot of people really understand what goes into generative AI or AI processes. The
Mhm.
computing power alone to operate that is incredulous. I was part of a seminar earlier this year, and the data farm required to support generative AI, the power requirements, the
Yeah.
cooling technologies that are required. I mean, it's beyond extensive. I mean, talking about servers that are literally under liquid, like the whole system is liquid cooled. right? And not just, the fans and the processor, literally the entire system is being liquid cooled.
Wow. So some trends there that I'm hearing is certainly the sustainability of the compute power and hardware that we need to exist in the AI era and succeed in the AI era. You also mentioned content authenticity. Let me go back to the content authenticity for a moment. How will the imaging industry help both develop AI developers and consumers of AI with content authenticity?
Well, so the most basic way to look at content authenticity is basically applying um, certified metadata
Hmm.
into your original content. So thinking about a scanner that generates a piece of paper, and when that is scanned, there's a little bit of code that follows the digital image that says, okay, I was scanned on this date by so and so user working at this company, and this is the locked in data that goes with it. And there's a little certificate that you could validate using, let's say, the C2PA software. You can go online and say, okay, is this a verified device or not? I'm sorry, verified document or not?
Yeah.
And if it says it is, then you know the data is true. If it says it isn't, then anybody could have created that data, or somebody could have manipulated it. Or if you have that data and somebody tries to change it, right, that certificate doesn't match the original content. And that flags it for something that's not authentic.
So putting that in kind of a terms of a use case, um, maybe let's go back to that invoice example for the supply chain company.
Sure.
That would allow my accounts payable team to scan an invoice, and maybe it's a very expensive invoice. We'll say it's for $1 million, invoice for $1 million. That certified metadata helps reduce my liability because I know a few months down the line, if I want to pull that invoice back up for audit purposes or what have you, it should have certified metadata associated with it. And I know this is not a deep fake invoice, and the email thread around it is not some sort of deep fake email thread. This is genuine content, and this was a true accounts payable.
Or think about an invoice that was submitted to your accounts payable device that, I'm sorry, accounts payable department, and it matches a company, somebody got a hold of an invoice, the company changed the payout value or the invoice amount that you need to pay by
Mm,
$1 million. And they're going to send that invoice to you, and it's going to look authentic, and it might have the right PO number and everything on it. And
yeah.
somebody goes, oh yeah, that's valid. And all of a sudden makes a payment for $1 million when the order was maybe for 20,000.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think about the crazy things that somebody can do with a digital image nowadays, especially if they're using generative.
Yeah.
Just literally changing the decimal places, the number of zeros on an invoice, right, can trick any worker that may be manually processing data. I mean, it might be a little bit more difficult if they're doing a
Yeah.
true PO number validation to invoice
Mhm.
amount. But I mean, I could see that where if you're working with a large vendor and you're doing millions of dollars a year in invoices, your purchase order might be for, let's say, $5 million. That is good for a year or for a project. And somebody just throws a, nefarious invoice into the mix, and all of a sudden there's enough money on the PO that you pay. And at some
Yeah.
point, somebody's going to go, well, where's my money? And you're going to go, well, we paid that. Here's the invoice. And they're going to go,
Yeah.
that's not our invoice.
Yes. So it might sound trivial when you're talking about maybe smaller invoices, not as big a deal, but it can become really significant if you don't have that extra layer of security. So I like the idea of metadata to help you manage that and create essentially an audit trail. You can
Yep.
verify when was it originated and when was it changed, if ever.
Yep.
Very cool. So, what other future industry challenges is the imaging industry facing right now?
Well, I said, one of the bigger ones is everybody still using USB based ad hoc scanners.
Mm,
Right? It's really trying to get everybody to more mobile. I mean, we've made everything else mobile, right? I mean, even if you think about printers today, right? You could buy a printer and connected to your network without a driver. I can take my phone, even though I need an app, I could print to it. But I mean, I think we all remember, HP had a print service where you could just, hit print on a web page and it'll automatically shoot that printed job to your printer. Right. I mean, think about the same thing in scanning, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Why are we still connecting a scanner or printer right to a PC via USB cable? The PC's not connected to the internet via cable anymore, right?
Yeah.
Enterprise environments, yes, but the reality is, if you're a remote worker, you're using Wi-Fi. I use Wi-Fi at home. Everything in my house has been my TV's Wi-Fi, my speakers are Wi-Fi enabled. Everything runs in Wi-Fi here. Phones are Wi-Fi, right? Why are we still trying to tether a cord to everything?
That's so interesting. And I feel like consumers don't even think about it because you just go on Amazon and you buy whatever scanner is well reviewed, you get it. And it's usually, I guess sometimes you can do a Bluetooth connection, right? But
Yeah, it's a little bit more manual. You have to be within proximity of the
yeah,
device.
yeah,
But yes, yeah, I mean, you can do Bluetooth, but once again, it's still a wireless technology.
yeah. So are you hoping maybe like 5 years from now, all business scanners and home scanners will just be connected
I,
wirelessly?
I, I think it'll take a little bit longer than 5 years, but I mean, the hardware is more network enabled today.
Yeah.
Right, but the gross majority is still USB connected. But the reality is the feature is there for that future, connection. At the same time, people are becoming more mobile, right? Mobile device. Everybody has a mobile device nowadays.
Yep.
Right? How many times do you get an email on your phone, or if you've got something if you're a remote worker and you work, let's just say you're in insurance, and I've got a bunch of documents or things I filled out with a customer on a claim, right? Why would you take your phone and take a picture of that when you could just scan it into a mobile scanner, wirelessly upload it directly into the application that's in the cloud?
Yeah.
Your PC today, your PC, your tablet, your phone, these are all intermediaries that are holding on to information and then transferring it to a downstream process. Why not just connect the downstream process with the front end device?
And when you say mobile scanners, you're not talking about a mobile application that scans documents by taking an image on your phone. You're talking about easy to transport, lightweight scanners that you can run multiple sheets through, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, they've got smaller mobile scanners, but I mean, if you're moving from location to location, if you've got access to a network enabled device with Twain Direct, you can essentially just call your application to scan to that device. I mean, it's not open where you could just do it to anything that's out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're going from location to location within an organization, right, you have to make sure you're set up on each device separately, where Twain Direct allows you to just say, okay, I'm going to scan to this department device and put my papers in and go. I don't have to reconfigure anything. All I have to do is select a different scanner.
That's cool. Now, is
Yeah.
that going to introduce some security concerns though?
Well, security is just as strong as the software vendor's abilities, right? If you're logged into your application using 128-bit encryption, then you're secure. The communication between the scanner and the software, right, has to follow some encryption, right? And Twain Direct supports encryption, right? So it really is flexible on what technologies you wrap around Twain Direct, whether it's security, whether it's ways to recompile images in between. You ultimately decide what that is. And the other nice thing about Twain Direct is it's platform agnostic. Doesn't matter if you're using iOS, Linux, Windows, Apache, or whatnot. The code is that simple. It uses JSON for call commands and I think just C# and a couple other basic, but you could just take that code and reconfigure that into any application. You're not tied to a specific operating system.
So let me ask you this. If you're painting this really cool picture of a very mobile workforce where you can easily connect scanners to just about anywhere or connect to scanners just about anywhere. If we get to that point 5 to 10 years from now, is there going to be any excuse not to fully digitally transform?
No, there should be
Do you
no
think there'll still do you think organizations will have digitally transformed though by that point? Or will we still have a lot of paper-based
Oh,
process?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. There'll still be a lot of paper out there.
No.
There's gonna be wet signatures and all sort. Legal's gonna be big on that, no matter how much they digitize. The US government's at least 20 years behind on paper. I
Oh
mean,
no.
they just finally got to a mandate, just this year that says that permanent archiving has to be digital. We're no longer holding on to paper,
Yeah.
right? We'll get there. We'll definitely get there. But yeah, there'll still be paper. Unfortunately, there'll still be paper.
Do,
Um,
do you think that people stopped talking about digital transformation so much because they gave up and got frustrated, or because they genuinely think they fully digitally transformed and like moved on to the next thing?
well, I think one of two things happened. One, they couldn't figure out what exactly it means to digitally transform,
Be fair.
right? The other one is they got so tired of hearing the word that they just stopped listening,
Yeah.
right? And listen, I'm just as guilty. I tend to go, when I'm writing stuff for even at Kodak here, or Kodak Alaris, I'll go in there and I'm like, well, digital transformation. And then I have to take a step back on, all right, we got to stop using digital transformation.
Oh yeah. I have now I have a visceral reaction if we
Yeah.
accidentally like use it at AIM, because I'm I have, yeah, the trauma from a few years ago of like constantly trying to pitch it and explain it. And at the end of the day, maybe it just wasn't a good term. You know?
Yeah, and the term of like, capture, advanced capture, right? That's that traditionally it was always I'm acquiring images, I'm storing them, or I'm sending them somewhere. Right
Hmm.
now it's become intelligent document processing. Now it's not just
Yes.
taking the document and storing it. I'm taking the document, I'm putting it into an application immediately or directly that says, okay, classify my document, extract this information, validate a database entry for it, and then store this image somewhere. Or don't store the image, just store the data. You don't need the image, right? I mean, there's so much that happens with that. And it reduces the amount of effort it takes for people to manage and process paper.
So do you feel like the IDP space is part of the imaging industry? Are they one and the
Oh,
same?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I would say one and the same. Wait, so I mean, if you think about 20 years ago, advanced capture was the big thing, right?
Mhm.
Everybody either, offered an advanced capture application, whether at the time it was Kofax Capture, we offered Kodak Capture Pro, um, right? These are all applications for acquiring images, doing some image enhancement, and at that point, you're sending that document somewhere else or storing it, right? IDP does all the same features now as these advanced capture applications have done natively,
Mhm.
right? So what you're doing is you're acquiring the image, the advanced capture is happening within these intelligent document processing applications, and then taking it a step further by, okay, we're going to classify this document based on the document type. I'm going to run this through, an OCR engine, which OCR has, been around for quite some time, but think about handwriting recognition.
Yeah.
That has evolved tremendously in the last 4 or 5 years, right? And then you think about the large language models, right? That Google and Amazon Web Services, right, and Microsoft, right? They're the big players out there in doing all of these, recognition and classification technologies. And all this software is all working its way to connect and go through all that.
That's great. And for any listeners who don't know OCR, it's optical character recognition. And it's key to recognizing any kind of handwriting, right? Really, any kind of like text. It doesn't have to be handwriting. And it captures it digitally, puts it in a database somewhere, and is pretty essential to just about every IDP process. Very cool. Okay. So Joseph, let's kind of a two-part question here that we'll end on. One, why should information management practitioners care about document caption standards like the TWAIN Working Group and what you provide? And then second part to that question is, what do you think information leaders need to know today to be successful in the future? So, Joseph, we've talked a lot about what the TWAIN Working Group does and imaging technology. Why should information management practitioners care about all of this? Why is it important to the field of information management?
At the end of the day, it's very simple. You have to acquire your information somehow. A lot of your information is on paper. How it gets to your system is quite important. It has to get there quickly, accurately, safely, right? So when you start thinking about why this really all matters, it's why does getting any information into your system matter? And do you want good data? You want easy to access? You want information that you can quickly gather? And at the same time, do you want to be limited to the hardware that's out there by certain components, or do you want it to be open where you can access information from anything? Right. I think that's important because you don't want to be limited. At some point, customers decide to make a move between hardware, right? Being able to easily switch without really taking on a lot is important. Today, if you're managing, systems and you're managing different scanning hardware, you're going through a regression process. You're testing, you're making sure it connects, you're making sure everything works right. You don't have any bugs. This combination of features doesn't have issues. Thinking about not having to do that anymore because the core technology is the same from brand to brand, right? Really, the difference is going to be who makes it versus whether or not it works or connects.
That's such a great way to put it, and another really strong argument for the importance of standardization. Whether it's the TWAIN standard or another standard, it makes your life easier, right? If you have that flexibility. So, Joseph, let's end on this question. What do you want information leaders to know today in order to be successful for the future?
Well, in terms of TWAIN Direct, I'd say there's just a better way to do it now. Adoption is increasing. We're still in the early stages, but the fact is we're all living in a connected world, and it's getting even more and more connected. So you want to make sure your technologies are just as connected, right, as the experiences we're all having today. You want to be able to access, whatever level of hardware is with ease, right? It's the most important thing. And at the end of the day, scanners are the smallest or least amount of thought that most people give in their organization, yet could be the most impactful, or it's the unnoticed burden.
Hmm. So not something to be overlooked. And I think that's such a good that theme around accessibility is really important. Data access is essential to success with AI, success with unstructured data management, success with information management, what
Yeah.
have you. So
And
that is, yeah, go ahead,
and
Joseph.
I'm sorry, but the beauty of it is you control the experience.
Mhm.
You as a technology manager or software developer, you control the experience. You control what your people and your customers see or operate, not the manufacturer, right? The window that you
Hmm.
have today comes from the manufacturer. When you open up a TWAIN driver, the manufacturer has made the decision of what that user interface looks like. That's their user experience. Think about a world where you don't have to rely on somebody else's user experience. You control the user experience. You have total control on how that works.
Hmm. Now that's kind of a trippy thought because having been in IT for years, it's
You
kind
were
of
always
easy.
limited by somebody else's
Yeah.
user experience,
But it's
somebody
also
else's
easy to
software.
pass the buck. Oh, like look what Dell did. Like look, oh no, the hardware is not working.
Right. But
Yeah,
every one of your users has to learn how to use it. And every manufacturer
yeah,
might have a similar experience, but they call the most common things different things. One
yeah.
manufacturer can call resolution DPI. One manufacturer might call it image quality. it's a simple analogy of one manufacturer to the next. But the reality is you can call it whatever your people know it as.
Yeah.
Name those settings, name those functions, turn things on, turn things off, hide it, show it all. But it's your experience to own.
That's great.
Yeah.
So to be successful now, start learning about things like TWAIN Direct and TWAIN Working Group so that you can get that level of control and that level of access and take accountability for your user experience. I think that's an excellent note to end on. Joseph, any final thoughts that you wanted to share?
Yeah, just anybody interested in attending our Developers Day later this year, we still have opens for sponsorship and attendance. There's going to be a lot of things we're covering, not just on TWAIN Direct, but the content authenticity. Open text will actually be there as well. So we've got some great sponsorships and great business track discussions on there. But if you're looking to expand your image acquisition technology or your existing software to support that more and have more of that direct integrated experience, this is the opportunity to learn more and experience it. And like our first Developers Day event, you'll walk out of there as a developer with a TWAIN Direct enabled application.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a great takeaway. So
Yeah.
where
You
can
can walk
folks
away
go to
in
learn
one day
more?
and walk away in one day with a working application.
That's a good sales pitch. I like that, Joseph. Where can they find this online to learn more about Developers
Oh,
Day?
they could just go right to twainworkinggroup.org. It should be right on our website there, I hope.
And if folks want to learn about a little bit more about imaging, especially as it relates to the information management space, we encourage you to visit AIIM.org, AIIM.org. And we are proud to have the TWAIN Working Group as a member of our organization, a member of our leadership council, and they're helping us advance the education around the imaging industry. So we hope you check out both the TWAIN Working Group and AIIM. And thanks so much for being on AIIM on Air, Joseph.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.